Hello, Hodgepodge Mama here. Continuing my series of videos on how we parent differently, I'd like to do a video on raising our daughter multilingual. This is different to the mainstream as far as the typical American um, household, I suppose, not worldwide, because worldwide most people are at least bilingual, if not multilingual. But yeah, as far as the average American who tends to be monolingual, perhaps they take a foreign language in school, but not necessarily become fluent or competent in it. A lot of the comments that we get, most of the comments that we get actually are from people who seem to be very impressed with the idea. So I guess it's positive, but it also shows that it's not really something that's common. And probably the funniest response that we get is, doesn't she get confused? It's not a very common comment, but when we do get it, it's pretty funny because that is spoken like a true monolingual. If you were bilingual, you wouldn't think to ask that question. Because no, the answer is no, she doesn't get confused. We don't get confused. Um, there's a different developmental process that a multilingual child goes through, but everything gets evened out within by the time they're ready for school work. So why do we parent this way? Why do we raise our daughter to be multilingual? First of all, it's natural for me to speak Polish to her. Polish is my native language. Polish is the language of my childhood. Polish is the language in which I experienced childhood up to the age of 8 when we immigrated to the US. And then, of course, Polish continued to be the home language as I was growing up. But up until 8, I was surrounded by it. So it was just always natural for me to speak Polish to little kids, like pre-verbal babies and toddlers. It's always been the case. It just automatically, I don't know, it just seems natural. I know that they have never heard the language before and they won't necessarily understand, but to me, it made sense to express myself in Polish. When you talk to a little baby, to a little toddler, about the kind of things that you would talk to them about, right? So it's natural for me. Second of all, there's no better time than the present. So if linguistic abilities is something of a possible goal that I might have for my daughter, it's better to do it now rather than later. Um, Depending on the research, depending on who you ask, some people say within the first 5 years of life, others say within 8 years. So others might say as long as you start exposure to the language, to the target language before adolescence, you may become competent in it. I think it depends on your goal a lot. Definitely if you want to have native-like fluency with no foreign accent, the earlier the better. So, in addition, I mentioned my native language is Polish, which means my extended family speaks Polish. My husband's native language is Spanish. His extended family is Spanish speaking, and so while the family members that our daughter comes into regular contact with all speak English, we wanted to provide that linguistic gap for her to have to be able to communicate with our relatives in the language that they may be more competent in. So that would mean Polish and Spanish. Next, we like to travel. We haven't traveled as much as we would like, and we want that love of travel also for our daughter. So, and we know language ability makes international travel, much easier. So that's another reason. Furthermore, worldview studies show that bilingualism is related to being able to see two different perspectives at the same time. So being able to see the world from the eyes of, let's say, an English speaker versus a Polish speaker versus a Spanish speaker. So you don't just have the linguistic abilities, but it actually comes with different value sets, attitudes. You just become more open-minded, and that is definitely a value that we value, that we cherish. So, our worldview. Also, growing up multilingual sets the stage to make it easier for our daughter to learn additional foreign languages of her choosing when she is older, when she's an adolescent or when she's an adult, because she will have had exposure to just the concept of not just learning a language, but also when you learn multiple languages, you're aware of how they are similar and how they differ. And that awareness already sets the stage for you to have an easier time learning additional languages in the future. So any language that she may want to pick up in the future, we don't have to anticipate that. Just by teaching her Polish and Spanish now, she's going to have an easier time picking up whatever other language she may want. And finally, just from a biological perspective, being bilingual involves both hemispheres of the brain working together. And I recently read that even when you're not actually speaking in a given language, your brain is kind of always working in both languages simultaneously. I'm not sure how that's possible, but that's what the research said. And so the more the two hemispheres talk to each other, the more neurotransmitters connect, and you have various intellectual pursuits that outside of language ability that can benefit from your multilingualism. So definitely not opposed to that. Okay, so that's why. Those are the reasons. Now let's talk about how we go about this. There's several strategies. One is one parent, one language. In other words, I speak Polish to my daughter. My husband speaks Spanish to our daughter. Regardless of whether we're at home, whether we're outside the home, whether we're with monolinguals, bilinguals, whatever. And over time, she will learn that that is the language that she communicates in with me versus, having Spanish for her dad. At times we may address her in English. Usually this happens if we're out and about with other people who only speak English, or who maybe don't only speak English, but they don't speak Polish or Spanish, whichever language we're using. And whatever we're saying to our daughter is somehow relevant to the immediate context. For example, if we're asking her to say hello, or to share, or to answer a question or something, we want, for the benefit of the non-speaker of the language, to understand that that's what we're trying to get her involved in the conversation that way. Sometimes I do translate into Polish what other people are saying to her in English, just to kind of emphasize that that is the language that is associated with mom. Okay. As far as media, now she's pretty young to have media in her day-to-day life, but she does watch a little bit of shows. She watches Maya the Bee, generally in Polish, and Peppa Pig in Spanish. And we found that has helped her incredibly in her vocabulary in those languages. So we started to know, when I used to still keep count of her new words. I think I stopped that around 18 months because it just took off. But when I would keep count, I would notice words popping up in one of our languages that I know we hadn't used with her, and we wondered where is she picking this up, because she's not really exposed to other people, and we realized it's from those shows. So the two shows, that's kind of like a caveat. So she's allowed to have some media, but it's going to be reinforcing our language skills. So it's not just media for the sake of watching TV and free babysitting or something. There's a reason behind our madness. English is the family language, which basically means my husband and I speak English to each other, whether our daughter is there or not. So she hears English all the time. In addition, obviously, whenever we're around other people, she hears English. When we go to church, when we go to the stores. So she definitely hears English. We are not in the least worried about her English. That is something that a lot of people, oh my goodness, well, that's great for her that she'll know Polish and Spanish, but what about school? That's a whole other video, because we are going to be homeschooling her. So I don't want to get derailed on that. But even if she were to go to public school, she's going to have all three languages by the time she's ready for school, at any rate, like I said, because we do speak English at home and other people address her in English. So she's, at this point, she uses all three languages. She has her favorite sayings, words, phrases in the various languages. So she uses all three languages. In addition, I wanted to mention, so we've talked about three languages, English, Polish, Spanish. We also use American Sign Language. Neither one of us is really fluent. Well, I took ASL in college, and I really enjoyed it, and I practiced with a friend of mine for a little bit. And then my husband, actually, he's got the more recent exposure because he works with a deaf colleague. So he actually took some classes with her, and he communicates in ASL with her on a daily basis. So he actually knows quite a lot of signs, and yeah, so that's definitely something that's kind of like a family project that we're working on. And we started with ASL way when our daughter was very small. My intention really was because we were also doing elimination communication, which is a separate video that I did. And I was hoping that she could let me know that she needed to go to the bathroom before she could speak. So I was teaching her the sign for potty. Long story short, that's not how it turned out. She did not end up signaling. She still doesn't use ASL to tell me that she has to go in the potty. She uses words to say that. But her actual first word, the first time she communicated with me through language, was when she did the ASL sign for milk. She looked at me and went like this, and I did a double take, and I nursed her. And ever since that moment, it was very obvious that when she wanted to nurse, she would do the sign for milk, and I would nurse her. And that was just awesome. And then she had several other ASL signs after that: cheese, more, again, what else? Drink, eat, all done. So there were a few kind of very typical kind of signs. A lot of these are like baby signs that a lot of parents use to try to have early communication with their kids, but we really stuck with the actual proper ASL sign, not some made up home signs, because we wanted her to be able to build on those and actually hopefully use ASL with other ASL users. But at any rate, that's what we are doing. That's what our multilingual household looks like. I wanted to go ahead and do a separate video on some hints on what I suggest for anyone that is interested in raising a multilingual child. I did want to mention just real quick, like I said, she uses all three languages, all four languages, depending. Like I said, she's got different words, phrases that she likes to sign, to use Polish, English, Spanish for. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and very interesting because sometimes, now I do speak Spanish and I know the signs that she uses, so I'm probably the best equipped to kind of know what she's saying. It's kind of funny sometimes when she's speaking with her dad or one of the other family members or friend, and they may be bilingual, but they may not know all the languages, and she'll communicate with them in, whichever language that comes to mind. And it's kind of hard for them to figure out what she's talking about. But rest assured, if this is you listening, that a lot of what comes out of her mouth is still gibberish. Okay, so it actually isn't in a particular language, so don't feel bad. It'll all work itself out, no problem. That's the first thing I wanted to mention. And the other thing was just our goals. I'm going to go into goals in the second part, but as far as for our daughter, basically we want her to have competency to have a conversation with a native speaker in Polish, in Spanish, and English, as well as to be able to read, your basic kind of newspaper, basic literacy in each of the languages. That's it. Very kind of laid back. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you for watching, and if you are actually interested in pursuing multilingualism with your kids or your future kids, then stay tuned for part 2. Thanks, bye.